Shalom. I'm Pastor Gilbert from One Human Asia. Thank you for watching this video. And if you are blessed, please subscribe to our channel. Now, I want to bring you a series of teachings that will address some issues that have appeared of late in the world, especially over the last 2 years. And these teachings are meant to separate the church from Israel, separate Christians from Israel, and basically erode Christian support for Israel. And, Israel knows that the main supporters in the world are evangelical Christians. So these kind of teachings have actually turned away people from people who were once very pro-Israel. Now they have turned 180 degrees. And I don't need to mention names. I'm sure you are aware. But what I want to address with this series of teachings is some of the things that they have said and help you to understand properly what the Bible says about these teachings. So let's go. Today, I want to bring you part 1. And in this part, I want to talk about Abraham. Now, one of the things that these people say is that Christian support of Israel is based on Genesis 12:3, where God said to Abraham, "Whoever blesses you, I will bless, and I will curse whoever curses you." And these people are in general very correct. Most Christians support Israel because of those things, because of that statement. But the argument that they put forth is that promise that was given to Abraham was simply to Abraham and not to the nation of Israel. So how do we understand this? Well, God's promise, that promise that God made to Abraham, included, if you continue reading, is that God promised that Abraham would be a blessing to the nations, to the world. And how was Abraham going to be a blessing to the world? By bringing forth Messiah, right? Messiah, Yeshua, Jesus, was that blessing that went forth to the world, right? So, but the thing is, how did Messiah come? Messiah came through the nation of Israel, okay? Now, if you go to Hebrews chapter 7, verses 9 and 10, it says this: even Levi or Levi, who received tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, so to speak, for he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. So the writer of Hebrews was referring to the time when Abraham met Melchizedek and gave him a tenth of everything that he had captured, right? But the writer of Hebrews says Levi or Levi was in the loins of his father. So Levi paid the tithes because his father Abraham, his ancestor, had paid the tithe to Melchizedek. And Levi was inside the body of Abraham. His DNA was there. So likewise, right, the nation of Israel, the other 11 tribes, were all within Abraham. So when we bless Abraham, we are blessing the nation of Israel. Okay? So I hope you are tracking with me. But God does also speak clearly to the nation. Okay? Remember the false prophet Balaam, who was commissioned by King Balak to curse the children of Israel. And he tried to 3 times. He attempted to curse Israel, but what happened? At each time, God stopped him, and instead of cursing, God made him bless Israel. Now let's go to the third attempt. And we go to Numbers chapter 24. Beginning in verse 5, we see the context that he is speaking to Israel, the nation of Israel, the people of Israel. Okay. Numbers 24 verse 5 says, "How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel." So this is about Israel. This, what Balaam was about to say, was going to affect Israel. Now look what he says in verse 9. He says, "He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? Blessed is he who blesses you, and cursed is he who curses you." So that blessing, that promise to Abraham, now was given to the children of Israel, the nation of Israel. So it's not just Genesis 12:3, but it's also in the book of Numbers. See, God is consistent. So whoever blesses the nation of Israel, God will bless. And whoever curses the nation of Israel will also be cursed. Now, let's take a look. All right. Sorry, let me. So when this promise was given, when Balaam prophesied this, Abraham was no longer alive. So this promise now was given to the children of Israel. And just as God made a covenant with Abraham in Genesis 15 and 17, which was then passed down to Isaac in Genesis 26 and Jacob in Genesis 35, God stated that the covenant would be passed down to their descendants, the Jewish people. Right? So the promises that God made to Abraham now come down to the Jewish people. So whatever God promised to Abraham is now valid with the Jewish people. So when we bless the nation of Israel, we will be blessed. If we curse the nation of Israel, we will be cursed. Now, let's talk about the covenant. This is another thing that someone else I heard said this. It says that the Abrahamic covenant has been fulfilled. So now it is no longer valid. Wow, that is quite a statement, right? And this person that I heard it from, he points to Joshua 24:28. So Joshua let the people depart, each to his own inheritance. So this is at the end of the book of Joshua, when they had this big meeting, and Joshua, he challenged them, choose this day whom you're going to serve, right? And they interpret this when it says that the children of Israel went back to their own inheritance as the fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant. So now the promises that God made to Abraham have been fulfilled, and so it is no longer valid. Okay. But so what this implies, first of all, is that the Jewish people no longer have a right to the land, the biblical land that they were given. And it also seeks to invalidate God's promises that those who bless Israel will be blessed, thus implying as Christians, we no longer need to bless Israel. So what they're saying is, you Christians, don't be concerned about Israel. Okay? So leave them alone. You just be concerned about your salvation and your walk with God. That's what they're saying. But we have to understand one thing. With God, when God makes covenant, it is everlasting. Okay? Genesis 17:7-8. God says, "I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants." This is to Abraham. "After you, in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and your descendants after you. Also, I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession." Twice in those two verses, you see the word everlasting. In Hebrew, the word is olam, which means beyond what you can see, right? It's further than one can see. Now, in Genesis 23:33, very interesting, God is called the everlasting God, or in Hebrew, Yahweh El Olam, okay, which means God has no end. He is the everlasting God. So if his covenant is an everlasting covenant, how can we say that it is no longer valid? And God's covenants by nature can only end with the demise of one party. This is something that we have to be aware of. The highest form of covenant we have in human relationships is the covenant of marriage. And when they, in the Christian marriage, when you, during the ceremony, you know, it says we make the vows, and the vows are till death do us part, right? So death ends everything. And now there was a very interesting incident in the book of Mark where this teacher of the law, the scribe, came to test Jesus, test Yeshua, right? Now you have to understand a little bit of the background. There were two main groups of religious leaders in Israel during Jesus' day. There were the Sadducees and there were the Pharisees. The Sadducees were in charge of the temple. The Pharisees were teachers, right? And the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. The Pharisees did. So this young scribe comes to Yeshua and testing Yeshua on the idea of the resurrection. And he says to Yeshua, you know, in the Torah, God said that if a man marries a woman and he dies without having any children, the woman should marry his brother. And so he comes up with this hypothetical case. He says, what happens if a woman marries a man and he dies without giving her a child? He marries her brother. And then he dies and she doesn't have a child. And he marries the third brother and on and on. This is until 7 brothers. So at the end, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be? Yeah, this was the question. He was trying to trap Jesus, Yeshua. But Jesus answered. First of all, he says, you don't understand. At the resurrection, there'll be no marriage. Okay. But then he says this, but concerning the dead that they rise, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the burning bush passage, that's in the book of Exodus, how God spoke to him, how God spoke to Moses, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. Therefore, you are mistaken. This is Mark 12, 26, 27. What did Yeshua mean by that? He says he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's not the God of the dead, but of the living. What did Yeshua mean? What Yeshua meant was that in God's eyes, these three, the patriarchs, are alive in heaven. They are still alive. Okay? So, what does that mean? That means the covenant is still valid. Okay? So, that's the thing. So, God specifically said to Abraham that the covenant was to the descendants of Abraham in their generations. So, thus, the Jewish people today are the recipients of that covenant. Whether they are walking righteously or not does not matter. Because when God made the covenant with Abraham, God did not put any conditions on him. Okay. In fact, Abraham was asleep when God made the covenant with him. Now let's talk about the land for a moment. See, another problem with Joshua, with saying that Joshua 24, 28 has fulfilled the Abrahamic covenant is the fact that Israel has never had all the land that God promised to them. Okay. In Genesis 15, verse 18, God promised Abraham a piece of real estate, land. How big is that land meant to be? It's meant to stretch, as it says in Genesis 15:18, from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. That means it is from Egypt to Iraq. And Israel has never had all that land that was given by God. But I believe that one day it will happen. Okay? Because in Genesis 19, in Isaiah 19:23-25, God speaks about this highway that he's going to build between Egypt and Assyria with Israel in the middle. Okay, and they will be one. So this will happen, I believe, when Yeshua returns. So all these covenants belong to Israel. They are still valid, including the land. It's all still valid because his covenant still stands. His covenant has not changed. Right? In Romans 11:28 and 29, Paul talks about this. He talks about the religious leaders who are persecuting the believers. He said, for the sake of the gospel, they are your enemies, these religious leaders. But for the sake of the fathers, for the sake of the patriarchs, they are beloved by God. And then, he says, for the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. He's talking about the gifts and the calling that God made to Israel. So they are still valid until today, until Yeshua comes again. So I hope you are blessed. I hope you have learned something today. And if you are blessed, please subscribe to our channel and you will be notified of the next video. God bless you. May you have a good day. Amen.